All right. Welcome to the empCannabis New York podcast, live from the House of Cannabis, the Green Room. And
is it me?
Okay. Welcome again to the empCannabis New York podcast, live from the House of Cannabis, the Green Room. We are back again. Today we're going to be talking to two people. First, Andrew Schriever, who is a prominent New York cannabis attorney, partner at Prince Lobel Tye, and he's going to give us an overview of what happened last week, and we'll get into that. And our second guest is Greg Silverman. He is the creative director and head of strategic partnerships here at House of Cannabis, and we're going to do a deep dive into cannabis economics in New York. So we all want to figure out what the algorithm is for that. So without further ado, Andrew. So Andrew, on our last podcast, we had Colin Decker, who is first legacy to legal licensee in New York. And we spoke for about half an hour talking about all the issues in terms of the marketing regulations. And then the day afterwards, Judge Kevin Bryant decided to change the whole game and erase the board, kick everything out, and then come back later in the day and amend that. So can you give us a quick overview of what happened and what's the impact going to be for us?
Sure, and thank you for having me. I think the short of it was sort of like the earthquake before the earthquake, at least for cannabis, because on Wednesday people were pretty much moving along, trying to get their ducks in a row. Those people who were proceeding toward licensure, toward opening, and then Wednesday late in the day, around 4:30. This decision comes down, and I'll get into the decision for a second, but the net effect of the decision was that pretty much 80% of the adult use regulations canceled, nullified, as if they didn't exist. So if you were participating in the market in any way, shape, or form or trying to do that, everything was uprooted. It was as if all of a sudden, it's like that movie where the laws are suspended for 24 hours, right? But in this case, it was the cannabis laws. So it was really sort of an uproar. And then about 24 hours later, Thursday, after all of us had been scrambling, trying to figure out how do you continue on to, go through a market where the rules that you were playing by just all got declared zeroed out, the court issued a decision that basically said, well, instead of all of it, which is hundreds of pages of rules, I'm just going to tackle these six rules that relate more specifically to the marketing, those specific rules that were challenged in the lawsuit. So we all took a deep breath. But there's, like the earthquake that we had the next day, there's a bit of a seismic ripple effect to these things. I could describe the lawsuit or.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about the narrowed scope.
Sure.
The 6 points that you said are still left and on the table. What are the implications of his ruling?
So they all boil down to essentially one central premise, which is that there was a restriction that said that if you want to do business in New York, if you want to sell cannabis retail, you're not going to be allowed to advertise and to show your pricing and to be directed from third-party websites. So a lot of people out there know Leafly, which was in this case the entity that brought the lawsuit together with a couple of other petitioners. One was a dispensary, other than it was a consumer. And Leafly is one of these third-party aggregators. They're a website that gives you information, research, tells you about strains and where to get the strains, and then you can click through, get to a local website, place your order. So it's a great mechanism for generating business. And these particular regulations all circled around that same issue. They were all designed in terms of being able to advertise, being able to pay a third party for these things, but all designed at stopping at keeping New Yorkers from doing that. And the rationale, at least that the state said to the court afterward, after the fact, after they'd passed the rule, too late, was that they wanted to prevent monopolies from coming in, sort of like an Amazon model where, everybody's going to flood to this website and it'll, shoulder out the little guy. But the court's problem with that rationale was that nobody had actually examined that or thought about that when the regulations were being passed. And this is the scary part. this is the same judge who had stopped the market the card stores from opening last year, same exact judge. And what he said was that he couldn't find any evidence that the Cannabis Control Board or the Office of Cannabis Management even looked at it, that they actually reviewed anything when they passed these rules. And at first we all thought, oh my God, he's saying that about all of the regulations. And then when the decision got issued the next day, it was just limited to these 6. But there's hundreds of other rules out there that were passed in the same process.
So the same thing could occur in any of those categories that someone is going to look and more or less force them to show their work, if you will?
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it, right? It's doing the math exam, right, but then not showing how you did the equations on the side, which leads the teacher to think you're cheating, right? And New York rulemaking, like in any state or in the federal government, you have to go through certain processes. But to those people who would sort of try to stop the market and think this is a way for me to, to jump in, don't go so quickly, because what happened was here, when the regulations got published, there were 2 rounds. What happened was December 2022, they published the first set and they said, what do you guys think? They put it out to the public. And then everybody commented, including Leafly. But then they made changes. They listened after that first round. And Leafly put in comments, they ignored Leafly's comments. But after they did that, they then issued a new set in June 2023. And there was another period where people had to comment. That's by the law. Now, at that time, the card injunction got issued by this judge. Mm-hmm. And in that opinion, the judge said, you need to get this market moving quickly. Do what you have to do. Come back here every week to move the market. So then 3 months later, they blessed the regulations without changing it, because if they changed it, it would have meant more delay, because they had to go through the whole process again. Uh-huh. So in order to do what the judge ordered them to do, which is speed this process up, now the judge is saying, you didn't slow the process down, you didn't dot your I's and cross your T's. So, will this be vulnerable? But the short answer, there's a long answer, but the short answer is there was a lot that was considered. There was a lot that was changed. There's a lot they did comment on. So this is not a nuclear device, and people shouldn't use it that way.
So what's the next step, you think, coming from OCM? Because they already were in a state of review, and then whatever they were doing, they had to stop and take a look at this ruling, I would imagine. Yeah.
So as it stands right now, the way this works is that unless there's what's called a stay, right, which is a court saying, okay, we're gonna hold off on enforcing this until an appeal court gets to rule on it. Unless that's in place, then as of right now, when people open the market, like the dispensaries here in the East Village, the legal dispensaries, they will be able now to go through Leafly, and you can buy their stuff through Leafly, because they can't stop you from doing that. Generally speaking, you can expect the OCM will say to the court, look, hold up, don't enforce this yet, because if you allow this to go forward, if you don't put a stop to this, then by the time the appeal's done, everybody's going to plant their roots in the Leafly website and other third-party websites, and then they're going to have to undo it if the appeal comes out and it turns out that that this was not okay. So right now we're in limbo. If I were the OCM, I would be moving very quickly to get a stop to this thing from being enforced. And the other thing I would do if I were the OCM, and I mean this with nothing but respect and rooting as much as I can for them, there are many holes that people can exploit. Most of us who would challenge anything want to do it for the better, so to make things more clear, but some just want to try to stop the market. Now is the time for them to be coming back, taking a whole new look at the regulations. They should be planning on these regulations being challenged again, and they should start a rulemaking process to go through a whole set of revisions and do it right this time. Because that way, at least, if this should happen and the court should say, you know what, I'm going to get rid of these regulations, at least there'll be a process where they're fixing it, and they'll be able to sort of bridge that transition period if they need to. But this is one of those situations where it's you have everybody shouting from the side, don't do this, you got to change this, it's going to be trouble. And if they just continue to ignore that, that's the tragedy.
So what was the rationale behind not having advertising?
So I think the idea was they're trying to be really careful about first and foremost, keeping this away from kids, right? Which and those of us who are proponents of legal cannabis, we all agree on that goal. It's adult use for a reason. And what's happening, I think, is because this is the end of prohibition and it's been considered this vice, this poison, this Schedule I drug for 90 years, the pendulum has moved all the way to one side of like really, 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 really strict regulation. So it's kind of, and it's in the wake of like the Joe Camel stuff that happened when I, in the 70s when I was growing up, the 80s in New York, well, across America, across the world, where there was, cigarette marketing to kid. And so there's this sort of like swing in a really hard direction saying, we're not going to do anything that has this type of marketing. So we're going to maintain these really, really tight controls. That's number one. And number two is we want to keep these monopolies out. The whole system's designed to sort of be compartmentalized. All the businesses so that you can't do different parts of the cannabis world, different cannabis business. That's to encourage small business, because when you have somebody who can do it all, it bumps out the small business. If you have somebody who's the aggregate advertising site, you have an Amazon situation, right? And if Amazon starts selling pharmaceuticals, right, for example, then your local drugstore doesn't really have a shot. So that it's a genuine issue, and it's legal for a state to regulate markets. But they also need to take a step back and realize, like, to be more strict about this than they would do with alcohol is just, from a scientific point of view, ridiculous, because we all know about the impacts of one versus the other.
And these businesses, they still have to get off the ground, and like not being able to advertise, it just seems like you're twisting one hand behind their back.
The whole problem with starting any new market, particularly after it's been illegal for 90 years. And before that, it was allowed for 5,000 years, and we were talking about this a little bit before, you have to untangle all these knots that came with it. And so anybody who's coming in now will have a first market advantage. I don't know if Seagram's, for example, was one of the first companies out after prohibition. I think that they were after alcohol prohibition, and they got the first market advantage. And then, the story tells itself from there. So everybody who goes into this understands that they're pioneers. It's going to cost more now. They're going to have more delays. They're going to get sort of more beat up. And the risk that these entrepreneurs are taking is that the returns for those people who hit it are really, really good, and they should be. But the trick is, how do you sort of allow the free market to take over, which all these entrepreneurs want? They don't want to be too restricted. But also, how do you avoid what happened in Oregon, where basically the state said, all right, everybody gets a license, everybody gets to grow. And then all of a sudden, like, there was like demand drop because there was nothing but supply. They had to burn all the excess product.
And nobody made any money. Which is the opposite of what they've been going for. But the problem with the regulations is that the intentions are really good. The intentions behind the MRTA are really good. Reversing all the elements of the war on people, right, is a really good idea. Right.
But I think they tried to give careful thought to how to avoid the traps that they were going to sort of get stuck in when they do this. But with each of these well-intentioned, regulatory sort of ideas they come up with, if they're not really careful, it's going to actually grind everything to a halt. That's what happened with CARD. CARD's a really good idea, but the legislature didn't bless it. So if the legislature says no to something, the OCM, which works for the legislature, can't come up and say, you said no, but I'll do it anyway, right? That was Judge Bryant's problem with the CARD program. We all believe in it, but if you don't sort of follow rule by rule, then anybody, all the people who are still looking to reverse this market, who are still looking to sort of go back to the days pre-legalization, right, or oppose it on a federal level, they'll all point to these things, because we're making it too complicated.
So what do you think the next steps are, either from a legislative basis or from a OCM review basis, in terms of shaping this into something that the trade-offs are made and people get something they can live with?
Well, one of the biggest issues from the beginning has been lack of funding. Right. Now that goes toward prioritizing social equity fund, which was supposed to be sort of up and running from the beginning. But that also goes to setting up the structures that you have internally. Right. So the state has a Department of Motor Vehicles. If you get a ticket and you can do a first appeal to somebody at the DMV because there's a whole hearing officer section set up. The MRTA calls for the same type of structure. Like for them to be able to review, like to issue an advisory opinion, for example. But right now, the only way you can ask them for anything is by emailing info@ocm.gov. So the problem is, I think they're underfunded, they're understaffed. And I'm not sure, I think they brought in a lot of people with cannabis expertise. I'm not sure how much people they brought in with legislative expertise, whose only job it is to sort of like watch the road, the procedural road, and sort of, and so when sort of people in charge say, well, we want to sort of muscle this through, somebody's got to be panicking in the background saying, look, if you push it through this way now, we're going to get stuck 6 months from now. And then people who have invested all their money are going to get stalled. So, and this goes to the
that's kind of where we are now, right?
Yeah, it's exactly. And I mean, that's been the story of New York. It's good intentions. And at first the story was, well, we're going to take 2 years to come up with the regulations because we want to do it right. That made a lot of sense to people like me. But then when you're doing that to sort of like get to the end and then make the unforced error of rushing the process because you're feeling this pressure, which is understandable, then you're proceeding at your own risk. And this is, they always say a lawyer's job, a good lawyer should worry. That's what we should be doing. And I'm not sure enough people are worrying, So I think it's staffing, and I think they really actually ought to have a sit down with people who have examined this, constitutional scholars too, people who know the New York State Constitution, and look at where the holes are. Not for the purpose of being critical, but really to say, okay, right, let's make sure we can sort of like, patch these up so that we're not going to get flooded.
So what do you think the number one issue still not talked about yet are?
I mean, one of the biggest issues, which is one that is the subject of a lawsuit my partner and I are involved in, really comes down to the sort of battle between who's in charge when it comes to putting these things up. That has not been settled. So, that lawsuit focuses on like the OCM could give this thing called protect one site from being located too near another dispensary, but they're doing it based on sites that are on paper that they've only approved in their back office. So if I'm being told stay 1,000 feet away from that building out there, but the building is only on plans in the OCM's office and all I see is an empty lot. And then I invest in the property here. I'm just, and the city thinks it's okay for me to invest here. The OCM can't come in and say, well, across the street, there's another thing, so you're out of the box. And that's happening now. It's causing a lot of confusion across the state. So they really gotta nail that down.
Now they recently put up some kind of location finder.
Yeah.
Does it work?
So the map works. It's a pretty good map in terms of functionality, but the biggest problem with it, my only problem with it, is that as soon as you click in the upper right-hand corner of the map, it has a big disclaimer that says this map is for informational purposes only. It's not to be relied upon, and the OCM will not be held responsible for any part of its contents, right? So if the purpose of a rule is to make things clear, and then you put something out that says, okay, here, we'll show you where, but don't tell you we said it, but don't count on us.
You can't have it both ways if
right,
you're a
like
state agency.
Telling a dog to come and stay at the same time. It's like, I don't know. So, to the extent it's reliable, it's helpful. But, the other challenge that we're involved in is whether, and this is the other issue, and this goes to the bigger issue I just talked about, under the New York Constitution and even the cannabis law, who gets to decide where a dispensary goes is up to the local government. Because they said you have houses of worship and you have schools, legislatures, the state said, we're gonna say you gotta stay a certain distance away. But then the state didn't say anything about you gotta have one dispensary this far from the other. The OCM said that. But it's the same problem that happened with CARD. The state didn't say it. The state chose not to say it. And then the OCM said, well, we'll make up that rule anyway. And in the cannabis law, the state actually said, whatever we didn't talk about for zoning, for siting, and where stuff goes, all that stuff goes back to the community boards and the towns and the villages where it belongs, because they know the neighborhoods.
Right.
So this issue is getting very thorny because now the state is throwing people who are just trying to get started and like have no problem with each other. They're all being thrown into a gladiator pit because you have two stores that are within 1,000 feet of each other, and the state's picking a winner, right? That needs to be fixed, and that one's in process. I mean, the other thing is what we've been talking about, and this is really actually where I should have started. The whole purpose of the MRTA, right? First paragraph is to redress all of the harms of disproportionate law enforcement, to give people opportunities, and they created this entire section of categories that they ascribe to social and economic equity. everything on paper was well-intentioned to make sure that that was funded. And in the beginning, a $200 million fund was announced to accomplish those goals through the CARD program. We know that fund fell through. And then there was another fund lined up, and then the injunction got issued, right? So this combination of this sort of like the missteps in terms of like securing funding to begin with, and then when you're finally sort of on the horizon, stumbling over your own, over a constitutional issue that could have been seen, those two things sort of create a perfect storm.
So did any of that funding actually get dispersed?
So I'm not aware that this initial fund has been established, and it's not to say for sure that it hasn't been the case. I don't know, sitting here, I haven't heard that it had. The injunction got lifted around, it was around September, I think. And since then, I haven't heard that there's been funding sources. I can tell you that there's a lot of CARD people that we're working with who are looking for funding, and everybody has the same scramble. But then that's the other problem. And this is something else they need to figure out. If you're a social and economic equity applicant, your license is locked up. You can't transfer it. Now that makes sense because they don't want people being a predator. Right. They don't want people coming, oh, you got this license, I'll give you $50 for it, and now I'll make $1 million, so to speak, right? But the problem with that is that if you want a loan in any other business, you could pledge your assets as collateral, but you can't pledge your main asset, which, because that asset, the license, is locked up and non-transferable.
So that impedes their opportunity to raise money.
And
it's almost impossible to open these businesses without raising money.
Well, that is the chicken or the egg dilemma. The biggest criticism of California, for example, which has a 3-to-1 ratio for legacy market versus legal market. So 75% of Californians still get their weed from legacy market because the legacy market wasn't invited in to begin with. So when that happens, you're going to undercut your own market. And in New York, they recognized the problem with that, and there was so much intent to help bring legacy in to develop these programs and CARD is absolutely an extension of that. But in the same breath, like any other program, if you don't line up the funding, you could have the Taj Mahal on paper, but if you don't actually have the bucks to build it, it's a pretty picture. And I don't mean to depress people.
No, it's actually making me think because I just feel like if New York doesn't find a way to support the legacy market, which is basically where all the intellectual capital and talent and people who actually know how to cultivate the plant, there's no way we could become leaders in the industry because those are our first round draft picks, if you will.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. I mean, the good news is there are legacy people who are coming in. Yes. There are good legacy people who have been out there. We know who they are, and they're getting licenses right now, both CARD and in the general pool.
Right.
So that's reason for. Yeah, is that okay? A little bit of echo. That's okay. So the short of it is, there are people who are coming in, and I've had tons of conversations with people in legacy who've all said the same thing, which is, why should I come in when I'm making so much more money outside and they're not giving me the opportunity? Until they give you the opportunity, I don't have a good answer for that question. But as soon as they do give you the opportunity, then it's pretty easy. It's take the long view. Like, everything I do is for my grandkids, and I don't have grandkids yet. So.
Well, that is a long view. So we still haven't figured out what the solution is. What do you think the solution is?
Well, I think it kind of depends on where you come from in terms of your perspective on the role of government in any market, right? Here, I think because the government has artificially kept this market submerged for 90 years, there's a lot of justification for the government trying to fix it and set it right, and not just sort of like open the doors, because then you get an Oregon situation. I think it really comes down to the biggest issue, which I think is probably the most frustrating thing for anybody who's involved in cannabis, is people aren't really listening enough when these issues are being flagged. So all the stuff I just talked about, or a lot of it, was avoidable from the beginning. So I think the solution really is, you know, okay, I'm not really a good sports analogy guy at all, but tell me if I do this well enough. In basketball, if it's getting a little bit sort of like crazy, and you're and you're down by the net, you take the ball back, right, and you just kind of bring it back to the ring, and you take a breath and you dribble for a second, and you sort of like, we need to do. Did I get that right? I mean, that's the right idea, right? So we need to do that as a state. And it's not to say that it needs to stop, but if while we know there are these infirmities out there, or at least people like me who study the law are screaming like, you got to take care of this. If you don't really stop, have like a really long discussion, go issue by issue, and say, okay, fine, how do we button this up and get that process going? Then this is one of those things where if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it.
So we've been talking with Andrew Schriever, a cannabis attorney. We've been talking all about the kind of upheaval last week and going forward. We're going to have you back because obviously this issue, there's still so many things to come out about it. But we appreciate you joining us here on empCannabis New York. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with Greg Silverman, the creative director and head of strategic partnerships at the House of Cannabis. You. And we're on. We're back with the empCannabis New York broadcast. This is Bob Ponce, and I want to shout out Jasmine Poole, our technical assistant, for navigating all the choppy waters that are probably all my fault. Now, we're in the House of Cannabis, and we're here with, the head of the house, the creative director and head of strategic partnerships here at House of Cannabis, Greg Silverstein. How are you today?
I'm good, Bob. Thank you.
You know you're tired because you're getting ready for 420s. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, we have a really good program for 420. We have a really good program for 420, and we are going to do a whole 420 week. So, we came up with this concept, New York 420 week, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy what we have. So from 417 to 421, we have a full week of programming. So on the 17th, we have the open house party. The entire week we're doing open house 420 week. So anybody can come buy a ticket. The house is going to be fully programmed. So we're going to have vendors and different brand activations, rolling stations, dab bars, all kinds of different fun that, the New York cannabis scene deserves to get access to. So, the idea is, come and see what we have and check us out. And we think you'll enjoy what you see.
Now, you're cooking up a visual surprise. Can you talk about it yet, or you got to?
Yeah, so maybe.
We'll make them wait.
I don't know. We have some cool artists in the building. I can say that. We have some of the best of New York City's commercial and street art scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say too much, but I think in the next week, if you come by 45 Howard or 427 Broadway, at that intersection, Howard and Broadway, and then, I'm hoping as well on Broadway and Grand, you're going to be able to see a really, really exciting image from some of the windows.
So look up.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about one of your favorite topics, which is the cannabis industry in New York. Legal, legacy, and illicit.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. I think it's really great that the patients and the customers have access to the plant, because they, didn't really have a safe access point, 10 or 20 years ago. And, it's really only been the last 5 years that we've really seen a more public facing industry in the city. We only really had medical up until a few years ago. And the rollout was a little bit slower than we all anticipated. So we really are only just getting access now as a state. So it's really exciting.
But we're still number one in consumption, right?
Without a doubt. I think it's a $5 or a $7 billion market when it's all said and done annually. And I also believe there's an increase in that if we are smart about how we do hospitality and tourism. Because I think tourism revenues for New York cannabis is material revenues that we should see as a state, both for our hotel sector and for our overall business environment. And so I would love to see a truly high-end consumer market come to the state over time. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get there, to make it a competitive economic model for hospitality businesses to enter.
Because we're still just trying to flesh out, what consumption lounges are going to look like, what food and beverage, it's right now it's limited to packaged products. So how do we develop those industries? This is one of the number one destinations in the world for just eating and drinking.
Yeah, I think food and beverage is key for really profitable cannabis businesses in the city. Cannabis goes with food in a really special way for some people. And then it also can help people just enjoy food at all when they have appetite issues from cancer treatments or other ailments. So, it's a really important thing for people to be able to eat while they're smoking, or people to be able to purchase good food, because, bags of chips, they really don't cut it, when you deal with the health department, I did a Mike Tyson event in New Jersey a few years ago, and the guy told me to go get Doritos for Mike Tyson when we didn't have the proper health and safety for that. So I had to go get a new vendor, and like, they're serious about it. Like he said, get chips for Mike Tyson. I said, no, I'll go find somebody else who has a health and safety permit. Thank you. And I expect that to be a go forward for food and beverage. So we need to have regulations on where this can happen and who can do it. And, you know, it has to be something that's presentable to the world, because this is New York City after all, like you said. So if we have something valuable to give, we should give it. And I think, you know, maybe the key here is that we need to be unrestricted to produce that product, because I think, you know, there's probably an extra $1 billion every year for the hospitality sector in cannabis related revenue, maybe more. I mean, I'd love to see a cannabis friendly hotel. I would love to see a cannabis friendly nightclub, a cannabis forward nightclub. I'd love to see hash forward consumption bars, which are a little bit less smoke intensive. So there's a whole new world in the cannabis space that we can build. You know, we're talking about everything from dab bars that can be like purchased for a shot, or to be purchased like an open bar with a wristband. And, you know, we also have ideas on how to do jar service, like bottle service, where, you know, we need the regulations to catch up with where the market is going. But there's a lot of money out here for us to make selling consumers products that they want and that are now legally available. So we need to merge these markets in a way that's productive for everybody. But I think there's a lot of work that can be done to produce this. It just needs to be done quickly, because frankly, I think New York has become the cannabis capital of the United States. There's more high quality cannabis produced in this state than there ever has been. There's more cannabis produced in this state than I think anybody ever expected. And they don't really know what to do next with like the quality side of the business. They think they do. The craft regs seem to be pretty good, but I think it's going to be a long time before we see those products on the shelves, just by the nature of just building a cultivation facility under a legal timeline. You can't just buy a warehouse in the middle of nowhere and set up some lights and some grows equipment and, you know, hand water every day and just get started tomorrow. Like, I know guys in the city that have just opened up where you wouldn't expect them to be, and they're killing it, and they have great products and they're doing well. And then there's guys that are opening up under the totally legitimate system and they get an injunction, and then they pay rent for 6 months and they bleed out. And this happens. And I'm from New Jersey originally. In the 2018 license, they won a lot of licenses for MSOs. In the 2019 license, and this was 6 licenses out of 150, so it was a really hard application series. And then in the 19 license, they had a really good medical round, and they got 2-year holdup from an injunction. This similarly with less time happened in New York recently. A lot of people spent a lot of money. And so we're in a spot now where we don't really know what to do. I think everybody, including myself, wants to see progress, but I mean, nobody really has an idea other than indoor grow and now. But I think ultimately there's a lot of opportunity for the state to push this forward in a way that's productive for us, because we could have everything we want. We just need real people to be in the room talking about this in a really like insightful way, because I think there's been a lot of anxiety about doing it slowly as opposed to anxiety about doing it right.
Mentioned indoor grow. So what are the issues concerning indoor grow?
Well, the cannabis plant is a very tricky girl. I say girl because you only generate products, generally speaking, from female plants. The male plant is removed from the cultivation process. So it's a tricky beast. You can't just stick plants in the ground and let them grow like some people might think. You have to take care of it. And a controlled environment is easier to manage, and you have more ability to generate the most productive, I guess, for lack of a better term, the secretion of the gland, where the cannabis plant literally becomes bigger, and the product, the yield, is directly generated from the product generating like more grease, more resin, larger bud structure. And that's all very, very difficult to do in general, but it's even more difficult in the outdoor environments or in the greenhouse environments where you don't have control. But those products are a lot cheaper because the cost to produce them is lower, less electricity. There's no build out costs. Generally you have to borrow money to produce these facilities. There's no lending, relatively speaking. If you're borrowing $100,000 versus $5 million, you're going to have a smaller liability to that product. So you can produce a decent hash product with greenhouse product from certain places. But, in general, connoisseurs stick to indoor cannabis. There are benefits from outdoor and greenhouse. Some people believe the sun is very important in a way that's not produced under man-made light. But I believe that if you're smoking flower specific, which is the majority of the market still, it really should be indoor if you're spending $50 or more per eighth. And if you want to buy good weed, you should be allowed to. But if it's only a certain type and the people who spend $2,000 a month or more on cannabis don't want that, then it's basic business. It's the 80-20 rule. They don't really understand how important a properly produced product is, but it doesn't really make sense to me because people want good things and people don't want to get ripped off and people don't want to get tricked. So, if you tell people, well, this is the best and here pay top dollar, but then your friend who goes to some other store gives you like what is actually the best and he paid less for it, it doesn't make sense. It's just comparative economics.
Right. So that's the problem we have in the market where the high-end consumer can't find the high-end product that they want at this point in time in the legal cycle.
Yes.
Now we kind of knew that was going to happen. We knew there was going to be at least a process in the beginning where the process would have to catch up to the quality. But I think, but if I hear you saying correctly, we're kind of past that point. The difference is so large that we need a course correction of some type.
Yeah. I met Doja back in Washington Square Park 2+ years ago. And he's regarded as one of the best brands in the world. He has global demand. He's a good friend of mine, so I'm a little biased. I'm wearing the shirt, but the product is superior in many regards, consistently superior. The true meaning of a brand is that you can trust it, that you rely on it. If you have products that are inconsistent, that's not a brand. That's somebody who's trying to build a brand who's having trouble. So there's only a handful of real brands where I can say, yes, that's going to be the same no matter where I go and where I find it, if it's authentic. But, it's also counterfeit. I mean, we're on Broadway and right near Canal Street. So there's a lot of fake stuff all over the place right here. So we are trying to really cultivate this like high-end consumer experience at THC NYC. And so because of that, we're really staying away from, a lot of the like bad products and really trying to push the best and the best. But like at the end of the day, we're here to see like the production of the state go forward in a way that's productive for everybody. But, this is a lavish space. We're in a high-end neighborhood. It's a historic building in Soho. We need to be trying to achieve like the Mecca of New York cannabis, not, like, I guess, cowering away from hard work. Because I think that's the big thing is I think there's like a lot of neglect in the rigor of doing it right with cannabis, because I don't think anybody's gotten it right. I think there's a lot of really good things in the MRTA in terms of equity and inclusion, because the truth is that we would all get washed away by the big corporations. I have good relationships with a few of them. They're not bad people, but they are a big corporation run by investors that have specific goals that aren't necessarily aligned with certain communities. They're aligned with their investors' goals and their earnings goals. And so it is important for us to produce a productively inclusive environment, especially with how the New York City and the New York State laws were impacting certain, disparaged communities. I mean, anybody who got arrested for cannabis deserves another chance because they had their lives impacted negatively. But it's really hard to trust people that don't have a few $1,000,000 in the bank to produce a really difficult business. It's really hard. So that's why we see a lot of states go towards a more corporate application process, because it's easier and safer. They're going to have less business failure. They're going to have less concerns over the trustworthiness of the audits and the accounting, because you have to keep track of everything in cannabis. It's really, really regulated. It's like pharma. That's why you see the people you see succeeding in cannabis, is because they operate these businesses like it's CVS or Walgreens, not like it's Driscoll Farms. But people want, and Driscoll Farms, I'm sure a lot of people would say, oh, they don't know what they're doing either. Like, you need the crazy $48 Japanese strawberry that, like, everybody's going to gravitate towards what they like and what they care about. Some people like alcohol, some people like gambling, some people like shopping, some people like sugar, but we all like something that we probably shouldn't. And so we just need to get over the cannabis of it all in this hospitality space, because like I said, like, this city probably has an extra $1 billion or $2 billion a year coming to it if we do it right with cannabis. And I think we're saying now, like, publicly, that like 98% of cannabis sales in the state are illicit sales. So it's just really not going well. But I think there's a lot of hope. Like, I'm actually for some enforcement, not necessarily the enforcement that some people are pushing, but I really do think we need to get cannabis away from the sale of food in, like, the bodegas and in the smoke shops where they're pretending to be a regular business, but they have weed on the shelf. Like, I have a big problem with you being able to go and buy a bacon, egg, and cheese and, an eighth of weed. Maybe I love that too for myself in, like, my own personal desires, but from a community organizing perspective, I think we need to protect kids from the products before they're ready. Like, I think it needs to be treated like alcohol in every sense of the word, of, like, it's for 21-year-olds. It's not for you. Learn about it when you're older. And, like, that's the enforcement we need to see. It's not the membership clubs. It's not the dispensaries that are checking IDs. It's not the dispensaries that are testing. It's not the places that, have great delivery services that people trust and care about. It's the stores that came up out of nowhere that are currently selling, like, non-packaged food, because, the food and beverage of it all is important. That's why there aren't regs, because restaurants are generally either bars or family spaces. I mean, usually they sell liquor or it's a family place. I mean, maybe there's some exceptions, but we need to really get this under control, because I think the biggest issues around the fear mongering are with the kids and the bodegas. Like, that's an issue. That's a real issue to me as somebody who cares about the success of this industry. I want more people to care about what's important, not the nonsense of politics, because politics isn't going to save us. But, like, I don't know, good cannabis might.
So how does one go about building a brand in New York in this environment?
I would stay away from the regulated markets right now. I would try to find a cultivator that you have a good relationship with, that you trust, or find a brand that's really, really good at sourcing products and collaborate with them on putting something together. And I would work first on the packaging and the branding identity and the social media on, like, what you want to build around. And then I would think about how you go about product. A lot of people start with product first. I think it's the most important thing, but I think you can, like, if you're not lazy and you're not committed to a specific person in terms of your sourcing, you need to go and find the best, but you need to figure out what you're going to be comfortable with supporting long term. Because, one thing that people make mistakes doing, and something that I made a mistake doing, is just, you know, not committing to the brand. And so you need to have something that you can rely on and not something that you want to change. And I think while the state is figuring this stuff out, the hard work, the branding, and the creative should be focused on what they want to see as a lasting image, not playing around, because the state's going to figure it out. It's New York. I mean, they'll one way or the other, they're going to do it. There's too much money.
Too much
here.
money on the table.
It's way too much. It's like I said, I think it's $1 billion, maybe it's $2 billion. I bet there are people out there that say this place could be generating $10 billion by 2030 if they get it right. I mean, they're saying it's 5 right now, and we're not seeing that. We're not seeing, I don't even know if we're crossing the billion. I mean, I don't pay attention enough to our weekly or monthly sales records, but when I was paying attention, the state did like a few $100 million in the time that most states of its size do a few billion. So we're really behind the 8 ball, but it doesn't mean we have to be. I think indoor is really important. Micros are really important. Allowing people to scale their micro into a larger business over time, and how we allow that and how we do help people. Like the way I see small business loans.
Because that's kind of the promise of merger, that we could get these smaller entities going, bringing diverse cultural and scientific acumen to the fore, and being able to participate as this market grows from whatever it is now to 10 billion and beyond.
Yeah, that's 100% what I was going to say. Is to that point, there's like a lot of risk in lending to a cannabis business, like more risk than any other business by far, because of the tax code, because of the regulations, the unknowns. There's a lot there that's risky. So the important thing is to reward success, because it's hard. It's harder than you'd expect. I think a lot of people don't understand how hard it is to make money as a legal cannabis business. 280E is like a 55 to 60% effective tax rate. And depending on how your state treats it, it could be even more. And, you know, you should expect to pay 50% or more in 280E tax if you include your other traditional taxes that you would pay. But you can't deduct taxable expenses like a normal business. You operate like this quasi-legal business because it is under federal law. You can't deduct taxable expenses from an illegal business. That's a law that we've had since the 70s, because a Coke dealer wrote off expenses on his tax return. And this is a real law that we all operate under. And it sounds insane. It sounds ridiculous. But like, this is what we deal with. No taxable income under like $6 million, $8 million for a store, for a vertical, you know, 10, 15, 20. If you make $20 million a year in a retail grow, where you have the multiple licenses and you control your supply chain and you can generate a real profit, like you might make a few $1,000,000 a year. You should be making way more than that off a $20 million revenue run on a double up gross profit. Like you're getting over 100% gross margins. So it's really tough right now for the little guy and the big guy. And that's what's so frustrating, is the guys at the top are also hurting. The stocks are just starting to bounce back. But if you look at the free cash flow and you look at the taxable income, and then you look at the taxes that go out, I mean, Curaleaf spent more than $250 million in taxes in like 2 years. $250 million in taxes. It's $1 billion business. It's not a $20 billion business.
Well, now the MSOs, I understand, they're just going as if 280 didn't exist, and they're daring the government to say something, which is something you can do when you're that size and you have an army of attorneys. But for the startups, they can't really take that risk, along with every other risk that they're already taking.
Well, I think that's a really good point, is there's no VC culture around cannabis right now outside of a few firms. And of those firms, only a handful of them are still even looking at deals right now. You know, I used to do a lot of deal flow for some specific clients, and I had a few deals that, you know, didn't go for whatever reason. And I had a few deals that didn't even get started because the liquidity environment just fundamentally changed. The capital environment is fundamentally different. Everything about the cost of capital has always been high for cannabis, but the cost of capital going up for everybody has made liquidity for cannabis specifically dry up more than we expected. And it's only now that people are playing around with the idea that Biden will, do something on cannabis before the election, that we're starting to see the stocks come up. But it's all speculative gains.
Right, because we still don't know, is he going to reschedule or deschedule? And it's a big difference between the D and the R.
I think deschedule is the way, but from what I know about publicly traded MSOs, like they don't care. They need something, anything. They'll become CVS tomorrow if they have to, which is the scary part, because I don't want that. I mean, I'm terrified of that vision, but I do see it as like they're down for all of it if it means they get to start paying less tax. And I mean, I don't know what she did, but Kim Rivers somehow got a bunch of money back, like $100+ million. I mean, she's got to be a magician. So like, I don't know what's going on, because the people are talking about that, but I also heard that it was Trulieve had a very specific organization that allowed that. And they're smart over there. They know what they're doing. So I don't doubt it. But that's like the one-off. Everybody else is paying through the nose.
And some think that's by design. It seems like the barriers to entry are always kept high, and there's somebody on the other side always trying to build the fence a little higher.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, because I think ultimately there's going to be a lot of good that comes in New York, but we have to see this real estate thing through, because there's a lot of empty spaces right now. The market's not good, but there's also not a lot of inventory for dispensary locations. There's a lot of rules that make it so you aren't necessarily guaranteed to get a license in the market that you want to get it in. So you might get a license in that market, but you're not going anywhere near where you think you should be going in terms of your neighborhood or your target demographic, or you could just end up in the middle of nowhere, because that's where the real estate market takes you, because there's no available spaces. And so that was like the real smart money play a few months ago, was trying to lock up spots for retail. And I mean, foot traffic is a real thing in the city, especially. You don't want to walk 6 blocks if you don't have to in New York. So I think right now it's going to be a race to who can produce the best product. And there's some good companies out there, like I'd love to shout out some legal brands, MFNY is a great company. They do a lot of work on the live rosin and extract space. But because of the market and the taxes, their products are way above the market price. So, I think the out the door price on the live gram rosin is like $120, $130. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's over $100 with the tax included. And unfortunately for that product category, like the competitive pricing is about half that. $60 to $80, maybe $100 if it's like the premium rosin. And 5 years ago, nobody even knew what rosin was in the rec market. They just started making it, but this is a huge part of the business now. It's the only way we can effectively store product. You can freeze rosin in bulk and use it 2-3 years later, and it's still pretty much good. You can't do that with flower. So we're in a very interesting moment right now where the industry is changing at a really rapid pace. And at the same time, the state's in a position to really change things up and make us, like I said, like we could have a hash forward scene that's totally different from the flower scene. Just like how we have cocktail bars and we have these different bistros, different types of, like I just saw we have like an espresso martini bar here now. Like, I mean, these people come up with all kinds of things in the hospitality space. So I don't see why, I'm pretty creative when it comes to cannabis. So, I don't see why jar service can't be a big thing. I don't see why, you can't have a bottle service waitress or waiter, I don't know, with the sparklers. Like, I don't see why they can't have a jar of weed and a lighter and a grinder and a pack of papers. Maybe we'll even give you a dope bong that you can keep. And like, we could do all kinds of cool stuff. Like in Miami, they have this place called Poppy Steak, and they pull out a briefcase and they have a steak in it. And it's like $1,000 and people love it. Like, I have a few ideas.
Poppy steak, huh?
I've never been, but I've seen the videos on Instagram, and I think that's like half the revenue is Instagram, is people going and doing, like, this is, unfortunately, this is our culture now of like going to do things, taking pictures of it, and like, this is how you're there. A lot of people like want to live in the moment. A lot of people are like, if I don't get it on the gram, I wasn't there. What do you mean? So we're in a new moment now where like people have different priorities. And I think like the leisure sector overall is going to be bigger. Like people are talking about a 4-day work week more. I saw a video of Steve Cohen, the financier and the owner of the Mets, talking about a 4-day work week. If we have hedge fund managers that own baseball teams talking about 4-day work week, I think the leisure market might be getting bigger. He also said he's investing in leisure. So, we're sitting in a really interesting moment right now as a city, as a state, and as a country. Do we want cannabis consumers to come here or not? Do we want the money in the city? Do we want the business for the restaurants? Do we want the nightclubs? Do we want I came up with this thing that I'm calling New York 420 week. I'm totally ripping off Fashion Week. Sorry, Fashion Week, I stole that. So, our goal, our goal as a team, as a business, as a community, is to deliver the best possible experience for our clients, for our customers, for our friends, for our community. So I don't really care how it gets done. I'm more of the belief that it better get done soon before we have to give it up to somebody else. Because we have this moment right now where 420 in New York is the place to be if you're a cannabis entrepreneur. If you have enough money to travel during the month of April and you're in this business, you should come to New York during the week of the 417 to the 421 span. A 5-day period, I believe, is going to be the new place to be during that space. So New York, April, weed, that's it. That's my vision.
I love it. Love it. Love it. So final thoughts on OCM. 3 things they need to address immediately to course correct so we could have the type of industry you're visioning.
Number 1, remove the potency tax. It's a terrible concept. It should never exist in our space. It doesn't make sense if you understand testing. You could take a plant and you could test 3 different parts of the dry material and get 3 different percentages. It is not a consistent measure of potency of a product. It is just a derivative that you get from a test result to make sure that the products are safe. But the fact that I can take a batch of a strain that I put on a shelf and test 10 different pieces and they're all different doesn't sit well for the potency tax. It's by nature, I don't want to use the words, but it's a little bit, I don't want to get into like the word capricious, but it's not sound. Number 2, I think, is indoor cultivation. It's really important for product quality, but I also think that there's a lot of room for innovation in that area, in the way that we deploy capital as a state. So building out facilities is expensive. They cost millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. And if you want to scale, you have to build it a certain way. You have to buy the real estate, or you have to have a lease that allows you to do certain things over time. And that can get really complicated and it can be expensive. And if you're operating in the city, it's even more expensive. And, people want to be able to say that this was New York grown. People want to be able to say this was grown in NYC. And so because of that, you need to have the best and the brightest on the regs for indoor. And if we want to have a craft market, we need to be serious about it. And I think the third thing is, I think it's empathy. I think it's empathy for the customer. I think it's empathy for the operator, the grower, the processor. It's hard out here right now. It's really, really rough for most cannabis entrepreneurs. It's really rough for investors. You know, I don't care how well capitalized they are, they're all hurting. They didn't make the money they thought they would make. They made money on one thing and lost it on 10 others. If they're lucky, they made money on one thing. And then also like the consumer is inundated with garbage right now. I mean, the sprayed packs is really bad. I mean, the state doesn't even talk about that. They say, oh, it's so dangerous. It's so untested. What about all the products that people are creating, like after the fact, like good products that they're adulterating with terpenes and distillate sprays? And you know, these are the biggest and hottest things right now, is these sprayed products that are I mean, they're really bad for you. They're bad for your throat. They're bad for your lungs. It's dangerous. And the state doesn't even feel like I don't even think they know about it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure somebody knows about it, but like, they're not talking about all the garbage out there. They're only talking about the trap shops. But what they need to be talking about is the right trap shops. And there are the right and the wrong. And I'm not saying that to say that there's some people are more equal than others. But what I am saying is that some people might not be regulated right now, but they are doing it right. They're selling clean products. They're selling the best in the world, and they're checking IDs, and they're maintaining their compliance on what the majority of other states allow. And so, you know, the fact that we haven't allowed for indoor cultivation, this is New York. People are going to go find it wherever it is. You know, they've been doing it since the mafia was invented. If it exists and people want it, it doesn't really matter what the rules are, especially here where there's a lot of money.
All right, so we've been talking with Greg Silverstein, the creative director and head of strategic partnerships at the House of Cannabis. Come see them this week. It's going to be lit.
Yes, sir.
Literally.
Literally.
So this is Bob Ponce on the empCannabis New York podcast. We are signing off for this week. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back following 420 with another great podcast. Thanks for joining us.